Yeah. My finance is kind of it's down here.
Yeah.
And then we have one. Are you thinking more like the fall or like? I think they do it. Yeah. So what it is about so I think that's what we're saying. free to travel, so that's what it's. I don't think. I think in the particular with I think I was one of that who was like almost like 1,000 for all no for the travel and all for the social stuff. I think probably how much my guess is that school have like we have that and one he said I didn't know what I was doing. A thousand and kind of like so that one is really fun and not really.
What is this there? I would hug you, but I'm late. No, I just keep them. And I cheated. And I went on a run this afternoon, where you know, water, and you get outside again. Yeah, it was London, and then I officiated a friend's wedding in the English countries. In Cotswold. It was stunning. It was, and the weather was 72. And I'm like, what the heck? I exit the list. I'm like, what is this? This fog of oppression. I'm sorry. Oh, that's okay. I'll save that for another time.
But I'm afraid that I was just we're ahead of one, so I think I did think about one of the report on Monday. We're at 37, so more, I think the USDA, talking about, maybe we're a lot for the conference, for less than like a staffers, not. So, that helps. So we're at 37, so we only have another 13 to go, really, technically, though, so hopefully we can do that in the next day. Yeah. But sometimes they don't quite so. And other one of the things we want to like be more innovative about how we can use because they programming that applies, and discipline is really like this one. I think they sense like
Yeah, it was kind of,
and when you get in those it's automatic.
oh, so official. They're live, yeah. Are these recorded? They are. The virtual? Okay. Yeah, they get recorded and they're put on YouTube. Oh. You can actually.
Can you hear me on this one? Okay, so then this is good.
Amazing, thank you. Really neat. Also means you can't have side chatter. You got a hot mic. Is the Zoom already on? Hi.
Hey, how are you?
Good. Thanks for coming.
Thanks for volunteering to be on this panel, everyone.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Really excited to have you.
I reserve for 6 just in case.
Okay.
And I can always reduce it. But yeah.
I should find out pretty soon.
And if you think we need to move the time, let me know, but I just made it 6:30 because I thought that would be.
Yeah,
the
that's good with
easiest.
me.
Yeah.
Can you try to usher people in?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that would be good. Yeah, I think she just turned the Zoom, like let people in.
Right.
Come on up. Henry, come on up. How are you? Pretty good. Has everything been sorted out since the last time we talked? Yeah. Is that your onboard?
Yeah, they,
Hi,
Don't
Henry.
get discouraged because it's.
Hi, Henry.
We've had it a couple of times, so it will work out at the end. And then someone's gonna do it. But we'll be able to work that out. Well, we'll figure it out.
You're in the local area anyway. You're just at St. John's, so you're not that far. Nice to see you in person.
Any, do you guys have an idea if there's people outside or should we just, Colby's checking?
Okay. Just tell people they can bring it in. What is that? Yeah. Okay, good evening, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to CAPAL's Washington Leadership Program. My name is Shama Ahmed, and I currently serve as the Managing Director at the Conference on Asian Pacific American Leadership. At CAPAL, we cultivate Asian American, Native Hawaiian, and Pacific Islander public service leaders, and we do this by providing formative professional experiences and growth opportunities. So this includes our public service scholarship and internship program, a roundtable series, a mentorship program, and tonight's signature Washington Leadership Program. Our 2024 WLP series was pulled together by a group of our recent scholars and intern alumni. And for tonight's session, we're excited to welcome Denise Liu, Emily G, Stevie Marvin, and Nahida Uddin to our panel discussion tonight. Tonight's session, the topic that we'll be discussing is economics in the AANHPI community. And we will discuss topics and issues centering around economic disparities within the AANHPI community. Topics such as job security, as well as navigating various career paths and sectors within public service will be discussed. There will be an audience survey that follows the panel discussion, and we strongly urge each one of you to please fill it out. It won't take more than a few minutes, and we'll actually have a pause before the Q&A begins for you to give you a few moments to just fill it out. It's super helpful for us as we develop programming for you all in the future. And then we invite you all to engage in a Q&A with our panelists, and then to stay after the session for our networking session. So we encourage you to follow and join our conversation tonight on social media using the hashtag #WeAreCAPAL. Thank you to our speakers and panelists this evening for spending their time with us, and to all of you for joining us. A very special thank you to our 2024 sponsor, the DC Mayor's Office, Moapia, for making programs like tonight's possible at CAPAL. So I am thrilled to now hand it over to our moderator tonight, Denise. Denise is a U.S. Air Force veteran who retired as a colonel from the military after serving 26 years as a healthcare administrator. Denise is current board member at CAPAL and also acts as the executive HRO leader coach at Cognosante, is that correct? LLC. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Denise.
Thank you, Shama. Well, thank you. I'm very glad to be here again for the third, I think this is the third WLP session for this summer. And we'll first do some introductions. We're joined by our three wonderful panelists here this evening, and have each one of them introduce themselves with your name, your organization, and a little bit about what you do at your organization. We'll start with, do you want to start with Emily?
Sure. Thank you so much, Shama, for having us here tonight, and Denise for the conversation. My name is Emily G. I'm Senior Vice President for the Inclusive Growth Department at the Center for American Progress. We are a nonpartisan, independent policy institute dedicated to improving the lives of all Americans, a think tank in Washington parlance. And I oversee our department that includes health policy, economic policy, and our women's initiative.
Hi, everyone. I'm Stevie Marvin. I'm the research assistant at the Economic Policy Institute's program on race, ethnicity, and the economy, also known as PRE. And I basically do what the job title entails. I support with research for the economists and the researcher on the team.
Hi, everyone. My name is Nahida, Director of Narrative and Communications at National Capacity. National Capacity stands for the National Coalition for Asian Pacific American Community Development. And we are a national coalition of about 100 community-based organizations that work around housing security, neighborhood preservation, and economic justice issues. And yeah.
Okay, we'll start with our first question. Just to open it up, I'll ask Nahida to start with what first inspired you to go into this type of work in the public sector,
Yeah.
nonprofit public sector.
So my family came to this country when I was 3 years old, and we moved to Brooklyn, New York, where I grew up in a Bangladeshi neighborhood. And so I saw firsthand the immigrant experience that I now work on at my organization. I saw my mom supporting the community, building this community in Kensington, Brooklyn. And though, I went to college for history and did my master's in South Asian studies. And it actually wasn't until after I left my undergrad, I learned about this community organizing fellowship in an organization in New York called Chaya CDC. And I, at that moment, had really wanted to be able to give back to the community that I came from. I grew up post 9/11, and so I think there was just a lot of political education and activation that this fellowship allowed me to access that I didn't previously have. And so I think that my work at Chaya was the first time I was really able to connect the dots between my personal experience and, really see that it wasn't actually just personal, that it was something that was happening at a community level, at a systemic level. So I worked at Chaya doing tenant organizing work for about 4.5 years, at which point I realized it's really hard to work at at that level with the community, so close to me, but also really, really, there's just a lot of challenges when you're working with people who are so close to the issues, and when you come from the community too, a lot of dynamics that you're navigating. And so Chaya actually is a member of National Capacity. And so I learned about this role at National Capacity. At the time, it was the Membership and Communications Coordinator. I joined National Capacity about almost 9 years ago at that level, and then grew in my position to where I am now.
Thank you. Stevie, how did you end up at the Economic Policy Institute?
Yes, so I was drawn to work in the nonprofit sector because I thought that would be somewhere I could develop the type of skills I want to develop outside of academia after my undergraduate years. And so I went to AU and I graduated bachelor's in econ and minors in American Studies and Transcultural Studies. And during my undergraduate years, I was taking my econ courses, but a lot of my political baseline and political framework was actually developed in my American Studies and Transcultural Studies. And through there, I was learning a lot about capitalism through a cultural theory lens. And I was also taking courses in econ as well, because AU's econ is pretty heterodox. We have a big Marxist tradition. And so, but it was more of a traditional, very European history type curriculum. And so I was, learning these political frameworks in my ethnic studies courses. And I was also involved in a lot of campus organizing and grassroots organizing and stuff like that. So I was yearning for a space in econ where I could kind of bridge this gap that I was experiencing in my econ curriculum and my classroom experience in my ethnic studies courses and also my organizing experience. And so I stumbled upon EPI, and PRE specifically does a lot of work that centers on race as an endogenous variable into economic disparities and with a public policy focus. And I thought that, hey, I don't have a lot of public policy research experience specific to econ in my undergrad. I think this would be a good opportunity to see how I can translate the, I guess, like political framework that I've developed in my undergraduate years into applied econ research. So that is how I got to EPI specifically.
Okay, and Emily, how did you end up at the Center for American Progress?
So I am an economist by training. I will say, I think looking back to high school, I think a lot of my passion for politics developed there. So where I became a political junkie and, always loved speech and debate. I was also the very stereotypical Asian kid in that I was really good at math. And in college discovered that the way that you can bring those two things together is economics is extremely math heavy, but also a great tool for developing policy and also changing people's lives and trying to develop programs that give people better economic security, to close disparities, to give people better healthcare. And so I really enjoyed my college courses in economics and particularly health economics. I guess after college, I actually spent a couple of years in Russia in journalism, which was a bit of a detour, but I think taught me how to write very quickly on deadline. And then got a PhD in economics with a focus on healthcare policy. It was fortuitous because I was finishing up right around the time that the Affordable Care Act was being implemented. I had an interest in healthcare coverage and policy as well. And so ended up coming down to DC before I was finished with my dissertation. Volunteered initially as an intern and then worked full-time for the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services, and basically got a front row seat to watching the implementation of the Affordable Care Act. So I was used to do data analysis to figure out where the department should be spending its advertising dollars for TV or radio ads to try to maximize the number of uninsured that they were reaching in order to get people enrolled in health insurance coverage. And so, I was also at work the day that the healthcare.gov website crashed, which is not my department, but helped, was part of the sort of nerd cleanup crew figuring out what would this do to healthcare premiums? How could we do even better outreach to people who needed healthcare? And then did a stint at the White House also working on healthcare policy. And then in 2016, what happened is Donald Trump got elected. He had campaigned on repealing the Affordable Care Act. And so I knew that I did not want to spend the next 4 years undoing everything we had just worked so hard to do at HHS. So joined Center for American Progress, as well as a bunch of allies on the outside to try to defend that law and have been there since.
Great. Okay. So through your work and I guess we can start with Nahida again. Through your work, what have you seen as one of the key economic disparities among the AANHPI community or any segment of that community?
Yeah, I will say that, part of the reason that national capacity exists is because of the model minority myth, which assumes that there is, there's this aggregate Asian American sometimes NHPI community, if, there are spaces that will reference the NHPI community, right? And that they're all well off, and it's used to create wedges between different communities of color. And, we know that that's not true. We know that there is not an aggregate experience, and so this myth actually hides the fact that there is many different realities within the AA and NHPI community, and that has to do with many different factors where they're based in the United States. Many of them are in really high cost housing markets, costs of living, migration histories. A lot of folks had come in through the Immigration Act and or many much more newer immigrant groups. And so there's many different experiences within the AA and NHPI community. And I think what we have found is it is so critical to do data disaggregation. I'm not a data person, but kudos to my co-panelists for the work that they do, because I think it is so important for data to tell the story of the realities of the economic disparities across communities. And when we are talking about these communities, so important to, whether it's oversampling for smaller groups or, it's really, really, really important to lift up those communities who are often left behind, whether it is NHPI communities, whether it's Southeast Asian communities, South Asian communities. I think that we like, from the work that I do on the narrative and communication side, it's like, how do we collect the stories, or how, even through other kinds of content, digital content, like how are we really conveying that there is not one singular experience, but that there are many different experiences that we want to be collecting data around. We are working on a study right now that's around collecting information on the financial well-being of communities that our member organizations work with post-pandemic, knowing that many of them are still dealing with some of the impacts of the pandemic, and also, the high inflation that continues to be impacting these communities. So, yeah.
Okay, and Stevie, can you comment on, maybe from your perspective and from the research side or the analysis side?
Yeah, so similar to what Nita was saying, the data disaggregation is probably the most important thing that we talk about. As Nita already mentioned, the API community is incredibly diverse, and the political and material conditions that draw us or tether us to the US are so, they're very unique to one another. They're also not comparable. And, these can range from, seeking economic opportunities, geopolitical instability that draws you to the US, or US colonialism, imperialism. So these differences, it's very hard to be captured under one label of API. And a lot of the work that, or how the API community gets represented often is just like under this one label as a comparison group. And so it often obscures these nuances and these, incommensurable differences. And so that's something that we've been talking about a lot, is when we highlight the API community, we specifically disaggregate it and provide like contextualizing history that can impact like immigration status, other economic barriers or structural barriers such as like anti-Indigenous policy, environmental displacement, and things like that when we lay out our data findings. One of the things that I recently worked on with my colleague was language access for API communities, specifically API workers. And so in 2014, the White House initiative, they did a project called, I think, the Vulnerable Workers Project. And so there they surveyed high risk and low income or low wage workers in the API community about issues that they face the workplace. And so a lot of it had to do with language access issues. Specifically, some of them are mistrust and skepticism that the government will provide timely and culturally relevant assistance, including language resources to address concerns, isolation and limited employment options, sometimes due to immigration status, and vulnerability and exploitation due to lack of information about their rights. And so some of the solutions that they came up with have to do with language access. So what we did was look at a little bit more on what the state of language access legislation is like for the US. And for right now, only 7 states, that's California, Hawaii, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, New York, and New Jersey, and also DC have passed language access. There's other state counties and cities that have passed it, but at the state level, it's only 7, which is really small. And this is an issue because, within some of the states that we mentioned, they have a high share of the API population, but again, talking about this aggregation, you have states like Oklahoma or Arkansas that have high shares of Marshallese and other Micronesian communities who have specifically high shares of limited English proficient individuals. And so even though the states listed have a high share of like the aggregate of API workers, you'll see that a big share of certain communities are left behind because of issues, or not issue, I guess, like how we approach the API community. And so, I think just building on the disaggregation conversation, that is probably the most important to understand the incredible diversity there is in our communities.
Hey, and Emily, I think that from your perspective, you can really comment on how these economic disparities impact like health policy and what are some of the trends that you've seen over the 15 years that you've been in this field.
Yeah, so I guess I will double down on the data disaggregation. That was going to be my main answer as well, because I think that's just so important to understanding the different immigration stories, the different economic situations people are in. I mean, I was sort of thinking back to that task of reaching people for, say, healthcare.gov enrollment or even vaccine take up during the COVID-19 pandemic. Understanding where those disparities are and the nuance of which communities those are precisely. Is it, Filipino? Is it Japanese? Is it, is it Vietnamese community are so important to be able to target policies and outreach to the people who need it most. And so I think it's very important for that reason. It's, it's being able to use the right languages. It's being aware of different cultural nuances that might be hangups to say something like vaccination, being able to change how you're reaching people and where you're reaching people. If you're, television is one way, but it might be useful to go out into churches or into community centers. And I think the more that we understand where people are, the better we can reach them.
Can I please add a couple because I feel like this is the heart of the work that we do. So as you all were sharing, I also just want to lift up that, when thinking about data also, it's like, you can look at a household income, right? And it can be really high, but we also know that a lot of AANHPI communities are multi-generational. So what does it actually mean when they may report a higher income? And then, so one example I wanted to lift up from the work that we did, was around, and this is very related to language access, is, for the PPP loan, right? Like it's okay. It's one thing to have resources in language, but if you just translate it and then your work ends there, that's not enough. There's also investing in the community organizations that will help ensure that those resources reach the communities that need those languages. And so I really just wanted to underscore those two things too.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for that clarification. And I also wanted to pick up the comment that you made about immigration status, because I think immigration status also, like the time that you immigrated to this country and what your circumstances were also impacts your economic status. So would any of you like to comment on that? About immigration status?
I will just name that there's a lot of cultural, so for example, I think when we're talking about financial systems, US financial systems, there may be a lot of mistrust, especially if you're coming from countries where the reason you left the country is because of challenges with governments or, mistrust of, or, conflicts and other often US, where the US had direct involvement in some of these conflicts as well. So just kind of thinking about the fact that there is, when we're thinking about the stories of our communities, we really, really, really need to position that within why they're here and, what that experience has been, and really just breaking that down. And also thinking, so part of the data that we collect is how are communities that, our member organizations are working with, how are they getting, the information? Are they getting it from friends and family? Are they getting it from social media? On the narrative side, misinformation, disinformation, kind of thinking about the whole package around the way that people receive and share information is really critical when we're thinking about, when we're thinking about these things.
Yeah, also, I think particularly at times when the rhetoric around immigration and hostility towards immigrants, it's really high, that can have a chilling effect on people getting the social services that they deserve, food stamps or health insurance or services that might be free because they're afraid of either jeopardizing their own insurance status or that of family members who may be here, either documented or undocumented. I have one of my dissertation chapters when I did my PhD was with my colleague who's now a professor at Osea Gintel, who's now at UPitt, and we found that if you were to look at communities based on how strong of a ethnic network they have there. So for example, are you a Vietnamese speaker in a community where you're essentially the only one, or are you in a community where there are a lot of other Vietnamese speakers around? We found that people who tend to be in communities where they have more speakers of their native tongue tend to sign up for health insurance more. So I think that speaks to, you know, the power of community, but also that we need to make sure that we are reaching people who might not have that community and social support.
And I just wanted to plug, so at National Capacity, we have a program that we work with some of our member organizations called Empowerment Economics, which is really around shifting some of the existing narratives around financial wealth building, you know, shifting these ideas that it's very individualistic, and moving towards a more, you know, collective way of thinking about how we are thinking about resources and wealth. So check it out on our website.
Yeah, I think I also read somewhere about there are certain communities that don't even depend on the traditional loan types of programs and things like that, and they kind of crowdsource from their family. And so what are some of those kinds of differences that you see that affects their economics?
So specifically, something that we've, you know, we come across a lot is like, for example, like in Muslim communities, often they are not able to take out like a mortgage because, you know, like there are rules within the religion that say like interest is sinful. So there are those kinds of nuances that we are kind of learning about as we go, because a lot of these are from like newer communities that we're starting to work with. So it's also just about like taking the time to learn like what are the kinds of loans then, or like what are the programs that they are, you know, because I think they're still buying homes, but like, you know, what there are other types of like packages that they access in order to do so. So yeah, the cultural competency piece I think is so critical to this work.
Yeah. What other cultural aspects have you seen that impacts some of the economic standing of some of our AANHPI communities?
I mean, so there's so many. So I think, you know, like some of our communities are not, you know, are like they are oral, like you know, based in oral traditions. So kind of thinking about how we are again, like thinking about sharing information. A lot of elders in our communities, right? So you know, and then just even like thinking about how many of them are actually accessing like traditional banking systems versus like, you know, saving money at home, or you know, like other or sharing it with their family, like, you know, asking family members to hold on to money and like, you know, those kinds of things. Though I don't know that this gets at your question, but I think the other thing I do want to lift up is, you know, over the last several years, there's been a big conversation around like violence and harm to Asian American communities. And I think what's really central to that conversation as well is that this harm cannot be separated from like economic vulnerability too, right? Like it's often, you know, the elders in the community, it's often those in the most vulnerable economic positions who are in harm's way. So I think, you know, just that's this other piece, I guess, when we're, because I know this is the question that's responding to this bit. So I just wanted to make sure that we also lift that up.
Let's turn to how you all got into the career fields that you've been into, and your path personally. Most of our audience are recent graduates or still in university. And what are some of the tips that you would give about navigating the job market in this type of field? Do you want to start?
I'm happy to go. I think I said a little bit earlier. I think looking back, there's sort of a lot of twists and turns. Like I actually wasn't that great of an economics student as an undergrad. Never got the State Department internship I wanted to do for a while. I thought I'd want to be a diplomat. You know, spent a little time in journalism and democracy work at the National Endowment for Democracy here in DC as my first job, before pivoting back to social policy. And I think in retrospect, a lot of it actually makes sense. I learned a lot of things from jobs that are sort of on the face of them unrelated to what I do now. But I think I would say like, don't be too stressed about finding the exact thing you want to do. So if you want to be an economist, but like can't get Stevie's really awesome job right out of school, it's okay. And I think it's learning to think about the world and sort of absorbing the most that you can in different jobs. And so, you know, I did event planning, but like in that event planning job, I also learned a lot about how Capitol Hill works. And so I would say don't stress it too much. Sort of, I think keep your eye on the prize, but you know, take what you can as it comes along, and you know, work hard and do your best regardless of what it is, because those pieces of things that you learn along the way will be useful later in your career.
Yeah, just to add on to, I mean, this is my first job outside of after graduating, so I don't have a huge career path to look back on. But when I was applying for jobs, I did cast a very wide net, and the similarities across those in terms of job title, there are no similarities, but they were all like I was drawing all from my passion and skills. You know, I applied. I think this was actually the only formal research job that I applied to. Other jobs included like program assistant or like a teaching assistant within like a like so it was like a API youth mentorship program and things like that. And I was just really casting a wide net because, similar to what Emily saying, I wasn't necessarily trying, well, I also didn't know what my future was going to look like. So maybe that's also why I was casting a wide net. But I did know that no matter what, I was going to learn more based on what my passions were, whether it has to do with more community oriented things or understanding the issues that I'm passionate about from different perspectives and whatnot. And so, yeah, just cast a wide net. Good luck to everyone, and it'll all work out, I think. Yeah.
So I've been at my job now almost 9 years at National Capacity, and I don't think my family can still say like what I do. I think I 5 years ago still heard my mom saying that I was a lawyer to somebody. I'm definitely not a lawyer. I've never been to law school. But I had in undergrad, I had a moment where I was exploring international law, and that she ran with that. And then I thought I was going to do academia, and academia was not for me. I did my master's in South Asian history, and yeah, it took me years and years and years to write my thesis. So I did not pursue that PhD. But I will say that both at Chaya and now at National Capacity, my two jobs that I've had since graduating, it was really something that someone said to me early in at National Capacity was, stay at a job for as long as you are also growing personally in that job, right? Like being able to build your skills, being able to like, once you've sort of like hit the ceiling in terms of how you are developing professionally as well, that may be time to sort of think about, what other opportunities are out there. And that's really something that I've embraced at National Capacity because, I think there are ways to continue to invest in your professional development. I am currently in my, so I had been working on my own for a very long time at National Capacity. It was like the only comms person, and I'm now building out that comms team. And I'm very much in my like developer era. So I have lots of like thoughts to share with y'all around like, so my colleague is I don't know if y'all are familiar with Strengths Finders. So my colleague is like a certified Strengths Finder coach, and it's, I think, awesome framing for thinking about the ways that you can lean into your strengths in your careers. So, doing that, like taking that assessment, there are so many other assessments to really think about, like, not only like what are your, like, how are you as a person showing up in the work and growing as a person. I really embrace learning at an organization too. So like, like constantly having the spirit of like learning in the work that you do, I think is also really, really critical.
Right. Yeah. Would you like to comment on that?
No, I totally agree with all that. And I think, yeah, I think I definitely agree with as you know, making sure that you're learning. And I think even if you're not learning in your job, you know, it could be time to move on, but also opportunity comes to those who look for it. And so it's also important to just like, if you know, communicate with your mentor or your supervisor what you want to do, because they may not know that there are things that your organization does that you would like to learn how to do, whether it's data work or, you know, event planning or, you know, getting new experiences outside your job. And chances are, if you offer your help, they will say yes. I will say yes to people who offer to help out more at my organization. But often I'm just, you know, so busy that I don't think about that. But I'm, you know, always happy to grow people. And I think, you know, loyalty is also important too, because every job that you have, that's someone who's going to recommend you for a job later in your career. So relationships matter. DC is a very small town. And so you will run into the same people again and again. And so those networks matter.
Yeah, on a related note, has there been a particularly meaningful highlight or an impactful moment that you can remember in your career so far for any of you?
I can go first. So I think for me, it was, even though it was the darkest of times, when I started at Center for American Progress, I was there during a period when Republicans actually had a trifecta. Trump was president, Republicans controlled both House and the Senate, and we thought the Affordable Care Act was toast. And so this would mean close to 30 million people losing healthcare literally overnight. Insurance companies would be able to go back to discriminate against people because of pre-existing conditions. You know, there would be no more free birth control or, you know, free annual exams. Insurance companies could stop offering basic things like maternity care or prescription drug coverage. And so this was a pretty dire situation, but I think what was the silver lining was just watching the advocacy community come out. Being part of a bigger movement was really inspiring. And I think I bonded really tightly with those at CAP who were part of that fight, as well as other organizations. It was really inspiring seeing the, you know, not just the advocates here in DC, but also as we call it, storyteller community, people who were, whose lives have been saved by the Affordable Care Act in a very literal way. Parents with kids who had disabilities who were really concerned about their future, and them coming to DC, walking the halls of Congress and fighting together to save the law. So that's, I think, professionally, one of the most inspiring moments. I will say, from a personal standpoint, one of my highlights has been, I had a chance to work at the White House at the end of the Obama administration, which was special in and of itself. You know, you get chills every time you walk into the building. But what's really cool for me as like an Asian kid from a small town in Washington State was my brother was working there at the same time. And so we were both there at the end of the Obama administration for that, you know, working for the first Black president. And that will forever be very special.
Very cool.
Oh, okay. I can go next. Well, I've only been at EPI for about a year and a half. And so I think when I was thinking about this, I think the biggest impact EPI has had on me, specifically my team. I came into EPI with very little official like public policy experience. I had research experience from being a research assistant at the undergraduate level, but as I told them in my interview, a lot of the approaches to the issues that they were passionate about was coming from a theoretical or like culture theory perspective. And so I think being a part of a team that is really supportive has been really special, and I didn't realize how much that would impact me. We always celebrate little wins. We always, every team meeting we have, we are always celebrating each other and supporting our work, and like at no matter what stage it's at. We also have an after show where we're just able to just chit chat about whatever. And so I think that really, that kind of work dynamic has really positively impacted the way I approach work, because I feel like in my undergraduate and also before, I have I think a lot of my motivations for school had to do with like external pressures and like anxieties of failing and whatnot. And so I think being in a workplace that is safe has been really nice. I think also a big impactful moment of being a part of EPI is being a part of a union. We are part of MPU Local 30, what was it? Well, MPU Local 70, IPTE Local 70 is MPU. And I never had the opportunity to be a part of a union, and that has been absolutely instrumental in understanding what rights I have and what kind of things that we can accomplish collectively as workers in terms of advocating for ourselves, advocating for policies that are worker friendly, advocating for each other in terms of like EDI things or for raises or like wage ladders and other policies. And so that has also been instrumental. So yeah.
Actually part of my response is also in response to something I said earlier. So I know I said, if you feel like you've hit the ceiling, like, you can explore other opportunities. And I definitely didn't mean that in like a year 1 or a year 2 thing at all. But like, for example, when I started at National Capacity, part of the reason that I did was because I came from a member organization and it was a membership role. It was a membership and communications. And now I'm mainly doing the communications work. I had no communications background. And I think that just demonstrates my, embracing that body of work and building that up. And I think, so that has, and I think a lot of that, my response was also going to be like in response to the Trump's election. I think prior to that, we had been going in one direction. We were going to develop like legislation around anti-displacement legislation. And of course, Trump got elected and it was like, we had to rebuild, from square one. And a lot of that meant shifting from, advocacy and policy work to rapid response and messaging and thinking about like how we are centering values-based messaging to sort of like, so that our coalition is not discouraged. And I that was a big part of the work that I did and a part of where I like grew into the organization. So I think that was a highlight for me. I think also to like Stevie, what you were sharing, I think part of what's been really important to me in the work that I've done at National Capacity is around building, thinking about us not just as, cogs in a machine, and that we are whole people in the work. When I first started, there was just a lot of like shifts that were happening and a lot of leadership. And I think this is just about changes that are happening, like external changes that are happening. But, there's like leadership was really resistant to like feeling, and there was like a lot of like, oh, why are we talking about feelings so much? And very recently we just had an event and I think I embraced like vulnerability a lot in the work that I do and centering like our stories and knowing that many of us come from vulnerable places. And so this last convention that we had, we closed out where like, and this is recorded, so I don't even know if I should, but like basically, one of our leaders who had years ago been like really frustrated by like all of the processing of feelings was herself really emotional. And it was just like this really proud moment for me that we were at a leadership level with like being able to like show our vulnerability and our emotions. And so I think that like the work that I've done to kind of contribute to building that culture is really meaningful to me.
So I have a question about how do you feel like how do you bridge your own identity with the work that you do? You want to comment on that? Like, is there something that you think from your own personal background that helps you in succeeding in the type of work that you're doing, or bringing your authentic self to work?
My father came to this country undocumented. And, both of my parents were limited English proficient. My dad was working class. My mom worked at home, and she did a lot of, like I said earlier, she did a lot of the community building work of, helping other new families with like their doctor's appointments and like registering them in school or like making sure. And if she wasn't doing it, she was having us do it, like my siblings and me, like where she would go with one person and we would go with another person, and we didn't have cell phones at the time. So it was like sitting in a clinic with people I barely knew for like, to provide that in language support. And so I think it's like that personal experience and my story is like what connects me to the work that I do now, because the work with the community, like with the communities that our members serve, that's not an experience that is like something I'm just reading about or writing about. That's like, that's still something that my family and my community experiences in New York City, right? And can benefit from the work that we do.
Yeah, I'm just thinking, because it's a complicated question, because I actually grew up in a place where we were one of very few Asian families, and I actually wasn't part of a strong Asian community, and that wasn't a big part of my identity as sort of Asian per se. But I think my family history is very important as I reflect on that. And, the reason that my grandparents my grandfathers came as paper sons, meaning they had it's like false documents because of the Chinese Exclusion Act, and came to this country as like literally illegal immigrants, because that was against the law to come as a Chinese person due to that racist law. But we're able to make it because of the GI Bill, because they served in the army and were given the chance to do that. Because my grandfather had a union job that paid a decent wage that allowed them to eventually own a house and send their son, my dad, to college. And so I think about responsibility to pay it forward to making sure that other families who are, here, regardless of how long you're here, have those same opportunities. I think another thing that makes me hopeful about today and my kids' generation too is, as a kid in the 80s, there just weren't that many Asian role models. And so the fact that we have an Asian American, USTR, United States Trade Representative Catherine Tai today is very cool. My old boss, Neera Tandon, is at the Domestic Policy Council running that at the White House. So I think that is gives me great hope. And I think, lifting up others in the community is really important to me. One other point that I've lost track of. I just, things like, as a kid, I thought it'd be really cool to be a sports writer. So embarrassing, like I had this really cheesy moment the other day where I ran into Mina Kimes. I don't know if you know her. She's like an ESPN commentator, but she is Asian American woman who is an ESPN football commentator. And I just thought that was so cool. I had to go up and fangirl.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, for me, I think a lot of the, like what I bring to work is definitely formed by a lot of the political organizing I did during my undergraduate years. And so, I was a part of like AU's ASU, Asian Student Union. Through there, we're working through a lot of various issues within the API community. And I think we also did a lot of work on like cross coalitional advocacy and stuff. And so I think that really helped me understand my positionality when I come to work as an East Asian person. And also growing up in Hawaii, I'm very cognizant about the role of settler colonialism there. And so I try to bring those, bring my informed self to work in terms of specific topics to propose for research or angles to include, or when we're talking about I guess the API community in aggregate, making sure that these nuances are captured at no matter how much we're going to be talking about a specific issue. And so I think my identity as a Korean American and also how that fits into the API community is something that I try to be very cognizant in, and also to understand my limitations and my perspectives and whatnot, and when to reach out to other folks for input as well. Yeah.
If any of you would go back in time to your younger self, what kind of advice would you give yourself?
Oh, should I start?
Yeah, sure.
Okay,
Yeah.
sorry. I think, well, I'll go back to my college years because it'll be only less than 2 years if I was talking about my career self. But I think when I was trying to vision myself outside of undergrad, I had a very narrow view of how my life was going to turn out based on kind of these, I guess, was a product of what was going on at the time, whether it's like, you know, the political conditions and things I was learning in class. And so I think if I were to give myself advice, I would let them know that I should definitely stay grounded and focused on political praxis and the political framework that I've developed and not stray from that, but don't let that shut myself off from opening up different ways my career could unfold, and allow myself to be open-minded in terms of how I navigate adulthood and like how my career unfolds, but figuring out what are key non-negotiables when it comes to the type of work that I produce and how that might affect my political beliefs or my moral obligations.
So if I had to think back to college, I think I'm glad I probably would have done more of it, more sort of exploring different topics for classes, different extracurriculars, because that's just a time when you can experiment with things and don't have to commit. And so I'm, you know, very grateful that I didn't spend all my time in econ courses or in government courses, and, you know, took history classes, took arts classes, because I think that just enriches life. And also it's such a privilege to be able to just, you know, your job right now is to sit and learn if you're a student, and taking advantage of all those resources that you have on a university campus to, you know, learn a language or learn how to dance or meet people that you wouldn't ordinarily meet. And so I probably would actually spend slightly less time studying and more getting to know my community, both on campus and off campus.
I would, I think in college, maybe explore more like extracurriculars that are not necessarily also career oriented, but just towards like, you know, personal health too. I got into like running later in my life, and I'm like, maybe I should have started that earlier, or just like other kinds of self-care practices, because those self-care practices will ground you through, you know, the rest of your career. And then also just, I think then like going into my career, like being comfortable with my voice. I think it's only very recently that I've even been comfortable like being in spaces like this and sharing, because, you know, imposter syndrome is very real, especially when you're like a younger voice in the space. So just knowing that, you know, if you center it on your experience, you always have something to say. So yeah.
Okay, so let's wrap it up with just one thing that you would like the audience to take away from today's discussion, whether it has to do with your career or whether it has to do with our topic about economics in the AANHPI community. Do you want to start?
Oh, sure. If it's about economics in the AA and NHPI community, definitely check out National Capacity's website, nationalcapacity.org. We have a lot of great data and reports coming up in the next year around like housing policies for renters, like recommendations around housing policies, financial well-being of our communities, and also an economic well-being report that really looks at disaggregating the data around poverty in AA and NHPI communities. And then, yeah, just like really like lean into your like skills building at this point in your career, and whether you want to check out Strengths Finders, or there's many, many other leadership assessment tools. And so definitely embrace those.
Okay.
I think with economic issues, I would just to underscore data disaggregation, how important that is. If you're into data, I think the ACS is a great data source option that has more like a larger sample size, and they collect better data on ethnicity and like, or I think they call it national origin. But just playing around with that and seeing what you find, I think that's, I think the more people like advocating for data disaggregation can help with pushing for policies that require data disaggregation, data collection. In terms of personal things, or I guess personal career stuff, there's no right way to get to where you want to be. So, you know, stay creative, explore, try a lot of new things, and you will learn so much in ways that you expect, but also ways that you don't expect. And so don't confine yourself to, three places you want to work for, or like 3 titles you want, because I'm sure there'll be many different ways that you'll get to where you want to get to.
And my advice would be to connect with people. So that goes for career advice. I think you take advantage of the opportunities to network, to, to learn and ask questions of people who might be a step or 2 ahead of you in their career, to understand how they got there and what advice they might have. If there's a job or a career path you're interested in, talk to people who are in that, because you can learn from them, but they also might know of a job opening that is suitable for you. So you don't know if you don't ask. And that goes for economics too. I think sometimes us data geeks stop at the point where we are, say, unpacking the American Community Survey and looking at the data, and wow, there's really interesting, cool trends in there, but we don't actually dig down to the layer of like, why is this community, why are there greater disparities in this community than, say higher maternal mortality in this community than in this community. And there's a lot that you can learn from actually talking to people on the ground, whether it's Nahida or somebody else, about how do businesses make decisions? What cultural practices might be driving this difference in, say, vaccination rates? Are there reasons why people from, this certain culture don't live in this neighborhood or do live in this neighborhood? And I think actually understanding sort of either the behavioral aspects or even the cultural and historical aspects to economic phenomena is really important to understanding them.
Thank you so much. All right. Before we move into the Q&A portion, I'll turn it over to Hannah.
All right, let's give a huge round of applause for our panelists. Denise, Emily, Stevie, Nahida, thank you so much for a really insightful and just really wonderful panel discussion tonight. So before we move into the audience Q&A, we're going to take a brief attendee survey. So for our virtual attendees, a link will be dropped in the chat box that you can access. And then for our in-person attendees, we're going to be handing out physical copies of the survey. If you would like a QR code instead, just feel free to let us know. Your feedback is so valuable for our programming, and believe it or not, just even the act of you completing the survey helps keep programs like CAPAL's Washington Leadership Program running year after year. So really just encourage you guys to fill out the survey, and once you're done, you can leave it on the side, and then staff will come collect the paper surveys afterwards. So we'll give about 5 or so minutes to fill out the survey before we move into the audience Q&A. For our virtual panelists, please feel free to drop any questions in the chat box. And for our in-person attendees, we'll be passing around mics on the side. So we'll give a few minutes for that. For our panelists, there was one question from our virtual attendee that was asked during the session. So maybe while folks fill out the survey, we can get to that question first before we move into some more audience Q&A, if that sounds good. All right, perfect. So our question is actually from Ali Huang, who is one of our cohort members. So shout out to Ali. And she says, thank you so much for your answers. I'm a rising senior at Pomona College studying public policy analysis and economics. So today's topic is so relevant to my interests and career goals. I would love to work at a think tank after graduation and potentially go to grad school someday. So this question is mostly directed towards Emily and Stevie. How does think tank work differ depending on your level of experience or whether you have an advanced degree? For example, if you were to compare a PhD economist or senior researcher and an entry-level RA in a typical think tank work environment, if that even exists, what does the day-to-day work look like? What responsibilities do you have? And what skills are most important? Also, for Emily specifically, I would love to know some of the similarities, differences, pros or cons between working for government at HHS or the White House and working for a think tank at Center for American Progress.
Great question.
Great question.
Yeah. So let me answer the first part first, which is we have, I guess at CAP, we have a whole range of folks working in the research department, from interns who are in college to folks who've graduated more recently who are research assistants or research associates, people with master's degrees or even law degrees with or without quantitative skills, and then a few folks like me who are PhDs from a quant background. And so there are sort of graduated levels of responsibility and project management that I guess probably are similar at EPI and other places, which is I think we tend to work on collaboratively on projects. So folks at the more senior levels will probably be helping shape the research agenda, have a pretty narrow subject matter expertise. So, when I was in a role as a health economist, I was responsible for kind of keeping up the news, scouting opportunities where we could be influencing policy and then developing a research agenda around that. So I might, notice there's a lot of in the economics literature about murders in hospitals and want to come up with some policy solutions to how we could stop that from limiting patient choice or raising the price of healthcare. And then would work with, say, a research assistant who might put together a literature review, who might help create some graphs from data that we found. We have research assistants who are amazing at fact checking and making sure that we haven't either misinterpreted a study or just made a typo or added up numbers wrong. And so there's a chance to sort of be hands-on with both the quantitative as well as the qualitative research there and get mentorship from senior folks. In terms of I guess what it's like to be a think tank versus in the government, I would say one of the big differences is, particularly at a big sort of bureaucratic place like HHS, is being more of a generalist was big for me because when I was at HHS, I was just working on the health insurance marketplaces. That's the sort of Obamacare exchanges for people who buy coverage on their own. And I was just working on healthcare premiums and enrollment. And so it was a pretty narrow set of things, but I was like the specialist for that. And when I came to CAP, we were a health policy team of 4 people. And so everything from COVID-19 to, mergers and antitrust policy to healthcare premiums to drug policy, we were responsible for. So it was a little bit of a trade-off between being a specialist with a lot of depth to being more of a generalist. And so some of that's just a matter of preference, but I think there's a lot of discipline that one learns from having to understand something in the depth that you are sort of literally having to program simulations of what it would look like to make a policy change and how that would affect, say, insurance enrollment. And I think there's what's also for me very, very freeing about having gone into the think tank world too is being able to determine what is going to be our stance on an issue. Being able to, say, go on TV and like sort of state my opinion on what the government should be doing about the high cost of hospital care or be doing to increase vaccination rates for COVID-19. Whereas in government, there's a very hierarchical structure. And so you are working for a principal, you are there to help carry out the mission of the secretary. And again, I think that's great for learning discipline, learning how government functions. And it's just really a different kind of environment.
Yeah, I think Emily pretty much touched up on almost all of my day-to-day tasks as a research assistant. I basically just, when I started the job, the main goal of the job is to help you either develop skills to go to grad school, and it doesn't necessarily have to be econ, it can be public policy or other degrees, or it's if you want to stay at EPI, get the training you need to advance within the think tank. And so I learned a lot of coding to help with the data infrastructure at EPI. So I helped with writing out some code that gets used regularly to pull numbers for our like regularly updated things such as the jobs day reports or different data libraries that we have. I also help with writing or rewriting some of the code that was used in older languages and keeping it up to date, and also building like coding infrastructures for longer projects. And so That's kind of like a lot of hard skills I developed, but that is to support a specific project. I do have opportunities to propose my own research topics, but in the day-to-day, or unless I guess there's like a pressing deadline, it's not the priority. It's usually to support existing research or the like research agendas for economists and researchers. And when I do propose my topics, I'm still at the stage where I get a lot of guidance on how to frame a research question that is aligned with the work that EPI does, approaching data polls and approaching analysis. And so I get a lot of guidance on that so that I'm able to learn how to produce research that is aligned with EPI's strategic goals or EPI's research agenda. So yeah, so I do a lot of the supportive work as a research assistant.
Okay. So let's turn to the audience. See if you have questions. Do we have some microphones available? Okay.
Hi, thank you so much for sharing with us and the amount of passion you put into your work. From my experience, I've seen in some Asian countries that when people talk about America, they talk about it in a very glorified sense. America is perfect. Everything is great in America. And of course, we know that that's not the reality. We have our issues here too. So have you seen this come up in your work? And what are the economic implications of that?
Yeah, I think we see that come up in the work. I think we see it come up in the sense that, once folks do arrive, they realize that it's actually really, really, like if the American dream of like homeownership, right? And actually realizing that it takes so many years to be able to build up the capital and the credit that you need to buy a home in the United States. So, so I think the ways that we see that, the glorification is actually like the other side. I think like the realities of realizing like it's actually not so simple, and there are quite and so there's the work around helping people to still, because I guess just because once they do arrive, just because they realize like it's not as like the streets aren't paved out of dreams or anything, like it doesn't mean that the dreams go away. So it's like, how do we still help them, how do we support them to move towards so a lot of our member organizations do a lot of like the financial coaching and the credit counseling and whether it's around starting a small business, buying a home, whatever it may be, like providing those kinds of supports in order to help them achieve. Yeah, I guess that's how we see it.
Hi, I'm Rena, and my question is for Emily. So, based on your experience at DHHS and now at the Center for American Progress, would you consider going back and working in government at DHHS or a different federal agency, and why?
I loved my time in public service. I think it was rewarding to do that and also to be there at the time that I was there. So I wouldn't rule that out. I'm very happy in my current job because I feel like it's doing some of the same work, working actually with some of the same people, but from the outside. So I think, for the right thing, I would consider going in, as many of my colleagues at CAP have. I think functionally, one of the things that CAP does besides generating ideas is if you're coming up with good proposals, good ideas, good plans to execute them, then a sign of success for our organization as well as for that person is someone will actually hire you to just do the thing. So one example is I have a colleague who came up with some ideas for how to help rural communities use resources that the Department of Agriculture has to help farmers or small businesses in rural communities. There's actually a lot of money available for rural development, but the problem is a lot of rural communities just don't have the the people to apply for the grants and like read the government documentation to be able to get that money flowing down to the community. So he had an idea for how you could use some regional centers to help get that money down to the community, and ended up going to work for the Department of Agriculture to go actually do the work. And so as an organization, it's actually a sign of success when we lose some people to the administration, because that means we're able to actually go do the policy. So I think, you know, for me at some point in my career, but I feel like there's a big opportunity to do, you know, work that's forward looking about trying to close some of the disparities to make sure that more Americans have economic security through more affordable housing, through healthcare, and that being able to contribute to that and work with the team that I do is very satisfying.
Hi, my name is Debbie. I'm the manager of student services here at UCDC. And I just want to reiterate, is it Nahida? What Nahida talked about with StrengthsFinder. And so for any UCDC students in the room right now, if you want to do the assessment, I can let you do the assessment. And I'm a certified coach, so I will give you at least 2 sessions before you leave UCDC if you would like. So I just want to put that out there.
Hello, my name is Fiona. I'm a student at UCLA. I'm really interested in anti-poverty work, and also race relations. So I remember reading like a report about Asian American AANHPI access to food stamps, and how a big part of like being eligible for those programs but not registering for them is because of the social stigma of poverty, and like, you know, work requirements and things like that. What's like some work that you've done to kind of remedy that and like kind of appeal to communities, and like let them know that it's okay to accept help and support, and that like it's not their fault that they're in the situation they're in?
So there are a number of organizations around town focused on food security. I think CLASP comes to mind as one that's focused on income supports and anti-poverty programs that I think does terrific work. Some of the work that my colleagues have done at Center for American Progress is about reducing administrative burdens. So are there ways to streamline paperwork for programs like food stamps or health insurance or other income-based programs? Another one that, you know, one method is trying to use program eligibility across different programs. So if, say, you qualify for health insurance on the basis of low income, then ideally we would like the state to carry that information over into other programs for which we may be eligible on income. So it actually doesn't take the person to do work to do that. There are some states, I think Maryland comes to mind as one where they've been clever about getting permission to use tax records to examine that, to be able to reach out to people who may be eligible for programs on the basis of income but aren't actually enrolled. And so I think taking some of the burden off the people is helpful. And then another way we've been working on that too is just trying to expand eligibility for programs to more immigrants, including undocumented immigrants, since you know, both the effects of worrying about jeopardizing one's immigration status or a family member's immigration status can be a real barrier to signing up for things that you are fully and legally eligible for.
And then I will just add, like, building support and funding for community-based organizations that, you know, if you're going to an organization for financial coaching already or credit counseling already, if then they have those kinds of services to like help you with, so they then become a trusted, you know, trusted partner for the community, then building in supports for them to also, you know, help you with food stamp applications is another thing that we definitely advocate for. The other, like, I will also say that some of the the qualitative findings from the data that we've done recently is really demonstrating that as like housing costs are becoming so high that the food insecurity is becoming like a bigger and bigger issue that community members are willing to name that, you know, they're not able to buy groceries. And so just, I think, thinking about the kinds of content that we're putting out there into the world that lets them feel like they're not alone, that there are other people who are also experiencing food insecurity.
I have another one here.
Hello, I'm Hannah. I'm one of the CAPAL interns, but this summer I'm working in Columbia. I think, I guess my question is, I think it was really interesting and really refreshing to see you all talk more about disaggregating data, because this is something on a personal level I've been trying to push within my university, but it kind of died out last year or 2 years ago because within that administration, it was hard to get them to care. Within like my peers, it wasn't like this sexy idea. Like it wasn't as interesting and as hot topic in a lot of leftist spaces. So I guess put bluntly, how do you get folks to care, whether that's the institution you're working within or that's the fellow AANHPI community? How do you get them to care about like this kind of
Great question. So I guess so folks online can hear, the question was about how do you get more people to care about data disaggregation, which we were talking about earlier. Good question. I don't have a great solution. I'm glad that you are working on it. I think probably some of it is honestly an awareness question, and educating the public and policymakers in particular about the reason why we need to do it. That you know, one Asian community doesn't look like another Asian community, or even sort of within the Black community, like, you know, people who are, you know, Black African versus sort of African American might have different needs and you know, different immigration story. I think another is honestly is funding for surveys. We're already in a situation where the census has not seen its funding keep up, and also you know, trying efforts to decrease sample size, you know, investing in say fewer questions. And so a lot of that also just needs to be having sufficient sample to be able to break out with fidelity smaller subsamples of, say, you know, Filipino versus you know, Native Hawaiian versus Chinese.
Yeah, I definitely agree with all of that. And I think there's this this work that needs to be done around the fact, like depending on who your audience is, that if you are not advocating for data disaggregation, you're going to be left behind, right? You're not going to be part of, like, especially, I mean, because if we're thinking about AA and NHPI communities, there's like AA, then there's NH, then there's PI. And then even within those, like if you go Southeast Asian, South Asian, but then there's even within that, the subgroups, right? And like there's Bangladeshi, there's Indian, there's Burmese, like, you know, there's just so many different pieces within that. And then you can further disaggregate by like regions in the country. There's so many people that can be left behind if we're really not making that case. And so I do think a huge part of data disaggregation is connecting it to the stories, right? So I had a colleague say once, like, it's really important to disaggregate data and aggregate stories, right? And like doing that work, I think, is a huge piece of how we make the data feel important, urgent, and tangible for stakeholders.
Yeah, I don't have too much to add. Emily and Nahida explained it perfectly. I think there, when it comes to data issues, I feel like a big issue people bring up is that no matter what type of data available, it's never like perfect. And so there's always like identities that are missed out, or like they're put together when they shouldn't be, or there's like ways that people misinterpret like identities and whatnot. But as Nahida was saying, like if you don't disaggregate, you'll be left out. And I think I feel like there's a lot of existing research on or like with disaggregated data, or the power, like what you can achieve with disaggregated data. So I feel like if you point to that and you can see what you can achieve with that. That could potentially help with your advocating efforts. But that is, yeah, the fight continues.
A little bit of a follow-up question to kind of two previous questions. Emily, you brought up this concept of deservedness of services, and to my knowledge, that's kind of one of the differentiating factors between the more conservative or the more liberal approach to welfare policy or the basic social safety net. And my question is, what is maybe your approach? What is some advice that you have, firstly, kind of implemented in your discussions, maybe for you, Nahida, representing these organizations who are really fighting for access for these vulnerable communities with, lawmakers, policymakers, people, stakeholders who have power to change policy, who might take one side of the argument or the other. I'm thinking like Reagan's rhetoric on welfare queens versus kind of like our discussion of these people are almost like disincentivized to even go access the services, even though they might qualify, just because there is stigma around it or there is just administrative burden around that. So open to any
That's a great question. So just to repeat, so in case folks online can't hear, the question was about deservedness for social services and stigma associated with it, and what are sort of conservative versus more liberal approaches. I think a lot of our work centers on making programs universal, or at least sort of more universal within certain, even within means testing. So I've done a lot of fighting against putting work requirements on Medicaid programs, for example. Arkansas is one state that recently tried to do that. I think Georgia was considering it for a while, and I think that would be high on the list if conservatives were to have a governing opportunity in 2025. And so that's something that we're very aware of. There's a proposal in Project 2025, which is the Heritage Foundation's for the authoritarian playbook, that says that Medicaid should be term limited. That's the program that helps the poor. And we just think that is inhumane to take people who are already low income by definition, because that's the Medicaid eligibility, often because of health crises, and take away their coverage. It could be 18.5 million people who have coverage at stake. And so I think one of the great things about the Affordable Care Act was that by making Medicaid available in states that participated to everybody below the poverty line, 138% of the federal poverty level, the effect was not just that it allowed those adults who hadn't previously been eligible for it to enroll for the first time, but you also saw what we call the welcome mat effect, which is there were people who were previously eligible but didn't enroll, either because they didn't know about it or there was some stigma. And so I think when you make programs universal, it can help take away some of that stigma and some of that complication about worrying if you're eligible or not. I think it also leaves all of us better off. We're also at CAP big advocates for universal preschool. The Head Start program is a fantastic program for giving low-income kids and their families a strong start on life from the early years. But we think it's even better if municipalities can use that to help support universal preschool programs for age 3 or age 4, so that all kids are starting out together, and that it becomes the norm to go to public preschool.
Yeah, I think this is like really at the heart of like the narrative change work too, right? Like, that's something that at National Capacity we've been thinking. I mean, it's narrative change, I think, is the buzzword of the day, and we have been thinking about it internally about how, like, what are the values that we are responding to in the work that we do, and what are we trying to move towards? And so language choices, I think, are really, really important in like the content we put out there. Like even if there's this piece about like working towards economic justice for all working Americans, or something like that, and it's like no, it like do you have to be a working so like kind of thinking about what are the words that we put out into the world, because they assign value to certain individuals versus others. And so really I think there's so much like cultural shifting work that needs to happen, and we're very much kind of just working on that right now, and being really mindful. We're gonna be in the next year or so developing a language guide that really helps inform us of like what are those choices that don't make it seem like we're, assigning value based on, certain assumptions or certain values that have been privileged in our communities because of capitalism or because of, all of the things around productivity and etc.
Okay, Hannah, do we have any other questions from online? Okay. All right, I think we can wrap up. Thank you so much for your questions. Very great questions from the audience.
Yeah, those audience questions were amazing. So thank you so much for making it such an engaged conversation. So I'm just trying to wrap up before we move on to our networking piece for this evening. So thank you to Denise, Emily, Nahida, and Stevie for your thoughtful conversation this evening. And thank you to everyone for joining us here tonight, whether you are here physically in the room or joining us online. If you enjoyed our third WLP session of the summer, we've got 3 more sessions to follow this summer. They're on Wednesdays from 6 to 7:30 p.m., both in person and in virtually via Zoom. Our next session will be on Native Hawaiian Pacific Islander identity within public service on July 17th. During this session, we'll discuss topics such as NHPI history, data disaggregation, and et cetera, as it pertains to the Native Hawaiian and Pacific Islander communities. So you can register for this session on our website at capal.org and view all of our upcoming events. Follow us on social media to learn more about our S&I program at Capal DC. And thank you for our 2024 sponsors for your continued support of our programs and continuing to provide opportunities for AANHPIs in public service. So good night, everyone, and thank you. And feel free to grab more dinner. I think we've got more food outside, and chat amongst yourself and do some networking, and hope to see you all next week. Oh, we will be doing a group photo. Hannah, do you have instructions for that, or are we going to do it outside? Okay, so once we all move outside, we'll just call everyone together for a group photo. Thank